From the University at Buffalo School of Social Work, welcome to the In Social Work podcast. I'm Peter Sabota, and it's good as always to have you along, everyone. Among providers of mental health services, including social workers, psychiatrists, and psychologists, the DSM-5 is the most utilized resource for assessing and diagnosing mental health problems in the United States, and actually much of the world. That said, the DSM is not without its share of controversy and concern, especially for social workers. On today's show, our guests, Sharon DeZellar and Lisa Borneman, will engage us in some critical thinking about the DSM, decolonizing assessment and diagnosis, and reconciling its medical model orientation with social work values, mission, education, and practice. Doctors DeZellar and Borneman will offer alternatives and provide examples of a collaborative orientation characteristic of social work values, a decolonized framework for assessment and conceptualization, as well as the importance of a trauma-informed care perspective. They'll also offer suggestions for social workers attempting to navigate a world and settings where the DSM is the driving force in assessment, treatment, and reimbursement. Lisa Borneman, DSW, LICSW, is Assistant Professor at the St. Catherine University Master of Social Work program, and Sharon DeZellar, PhD, LICSW, is also Assistant Professor at St. Catherine's University in the Master of Social Work program. Hi, Lisa and Sharon. Welcome to In Social Work.
Hello.
Hello. Thank you again publicly for your patience in trying to schedule this. All props to both of you. Thank you. So today, I'm going to invite the two of you to do some, well, you've already done it, critical thinking about the DSM, decolonizing assessment and diagnosis especially in social work practice. Maybe even think critically about social work in general, including our values, mission, and practice. Simple stuff. It's just stuff that's just easy to figure out. So to get to it straight away, especially when it comes to assessment and as a diagnostic tool for social workers, what is not to love about the wonderful and beautiful diagnostic and statistical manual of mental disorders?
So much, Peter. There is so much to love. This is Sharon speaking. Lisa and I can talk about this for a while. The reliability is bad. It's for some of the diagnoses, including major depressive disorder and generalized anxiety disorder, which we know are two of the biggest diagnoses that we are often engaging with. Reliability hovers around like 30%. Now, none of us would be able to get research studies published with those numbers. And yet this is what we're told is our, kind of our guidebook, right? For like how to determine the best diagnosis for folks.
Yes, I've heard it referred to as the Bible of mental health care practice. Yeah, that's a bad Bible. All right, sorry. Would you like to chime in, Lisa?
Yes, yeah, this is Lisa. So I think there's so many things about it, but
list them. Go ahead.
Yeah, one other thing that comes to mind quickly is the DSM has a tendency, because it's based in the medical model, it pathologizes, like responses to trauma. It pathologizes, and it doesn't incorporate the trauma that we see. So like PTSD is really our only way of identifying trauma, and that doesn't fit everyone, right? It was normed. So many of our diagnoses are normed on a very specific population, typically white, often male, specific age groups, right? So it's not normed on, and yet it's used universally. right? And so it misses so much when we think about folks from the BIPOC community, when we're looking at, like anyone that is not white, right? White, predominantly male, it's not speaking to that group. And so, and PTSD was mostly normed on veterans. Very helpful. And not everyone who has, most people who have trauma are not having trauma from that. So it's, yeah. And then it pathologizes responses, like normal responses to not, unusual experiences.
Yeah, and that's kind of, at least my understanding, that's kind of how the medical model works, is that you conduct a certain kind of assessment to arrive at a diagnosis, and then the diagnosis dictates how you respond to that
Mm-hmm.
problem. So it's this kind of like baking a cake recipe approach to the medical model doesn't seem like the best fit for human beings, who tend to be a lot more interesting than
Right,
most
right,
cake recipes. Yeah.
right. We're far more complicated.
Yeah.
Right. And I think related to that piece, this is Sharon again. Related to that is, like the idea, the original purpose of the DSM, I think was um, much more one that we can get behind in terms of aligning with social work values, right? The original idea was more just to, help clinicians um, understand different diagnoses and mental health conditions, as well as potentially for the purpose of guiding, then what are we going to do about it, right? However, over the multiple evolutions and revisions of the DSM, it has been co-opted in a way. In fact, in DSM 3, I actually pulled up the quote because Lisa and I
Mhm.
have talked about this.
Well,
There
this is
was
going to be good.
at the beginning of the DSM, in the DSM 3, there's actually a caution. On page 12, if you've got an old copy, you can go look it up, but there's a caution at the beginning of it that specifically states that the use of this manual for non-clinical purposes, such as determination of legal responsibility, competency or insanity, or justification for third-party payment, must be critically examined, excuse me, must be critically
Oh,
examined. And it actually says that in the beginning of the DSM. And then, but for DSM-4, they took that out.
Yep.
So now,
yeah.
so they used to caution us saying this isn't supposed to be used for insurance billing. This isn't supposed to be used for determining sanity in court
Mhm.
hearings. Like it's meant to be a clinical guide, right? But clearly we have swayed from that original purpose, right? And there's a lot of money behind the DSM, and there are a lot of people that are making an awful lot of money based on this book getting used and used for billing purposes. Um, and so when we think about our social work values, we're unfortunately in a situation where we're having to use this system because our insurance providers require it, and yet ethically it doesn't line up with our values.
Mhm.
Yeah, later on, I hope, yeah, I don't want to do it now, but later on, please remind me. I want to get back to, how do social workers navigate this tension between acting in accordance with our values and ethics, but also perhaps working in settings where this is driving practice,
Mhm,
and maybe walking that kind of tightrope. So I don't want to go there
mhm,
now, but it
mhm.
just, the light bulb went off while you were
Yeah,
talking, and I don't want to
yeah, we
lose
can do
it.
that.
In DSM-2, which I learned when I was in graduate school, I was very surprised to learn that homosexuality was a mental disorder.
Mm.
I think they had it down as, I remember words like ego syntonic or ego dystonic or something. But
Mhm,
I also remember it being fascinating that members of the APA itself started sending letters to the team saying, by the way, I'm a gay, or lesbian person, professional, a psychiatrist, and there's a whole bunch of people like me in this field. Um, and there, it kind of disappeared over time. So it's obviously a work in progress.
Mhm.
Mm,
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good example of some really great advocacy that has happened by
mhm.
communities to get that removed. There's a great documentary called Cured, and we actually have all of our students watch that documentary as like a very an opening. So this is in the course in which we teach students about clinical assessment and
Oh,
diagnosing, and we watch this documentary at the beginning, which is about how homosexuality was in the DSM and the advocacy efforts that got that changed.
mhm.
And it really shows how we do have um, some ability to make some changes if we work together.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So,
And you bake that in early as your students are learning about assessment. See,
yep,
I think
we
that's
start critical.
fantastic.
We
Yeah.
start critical,
Yeah.
Mhm.
and we don't ever stop.
Right. Yeah. And that's
All right.
that's like their first,
I'm a
that's one of
fan.
their first clinical classes that we
Mhm.
have, is that, so that they all start with that sort of view.
So yeah, I mean, and also talking, I think I'm not a fan of the DSM if that's not already obvious,
Mhm.
but we've kind of covered in some ways that I think the easy part about our conversation today, maybe more well worn. But how about talking about the DSM in terms of its kind of inadequacies from a decolonized approach to the world that we live in and our existing structures? Where does it fall short from a decolonization point of view?
Well, this is Lisa again. I think, I touched on that a bit earlier, just that, we're who it's normed on, and the universality, the way that we treat it as a universally applicable to
Mhm.
all, and the fact that, like, even though it has added sort of a cultural, in quotes, in air quotes, cultural aspect to
Yeah,
it, it's not like,
you're
it's
being
not
generous.
useful.
Yeah.
And the sort of cultural pieces that they put in there they're not useful. It's sort of these extreme examples of like a cultural difference in how something might show up. So it really doesn't allow for that piece of it. Like, it doesn't allow for difference within a human and how they show up with whatever symptoms they have. And it's symptom based, right? It's based on what's wrong with you versus what happened to you or what strengths you have.
Mm.
And so it's only cataloging symptoms and not looking at, like, I think about specific things like oppositional defiant disorder or borderline personality disorder, right? Those are two that are often, folks who receive those diagnoses are often folks who've experienced trauma and fairly extreme trauma. And
Mm.
so the behaviors, and it's based on behaviors versus actual symptomology. So, like, if we're thinking about depression, where, you're not eating as much, or you're eating more, or your sleep is impacted, or your mood is impacted, right? It's based on those things. Oppositional defiant disorder and personality disorder specifically are more behaviorally focused, and they're not couched in a way of, like, trauma is not included or considered as a part of that diagnosis. And so again, we're pathologizing a behavioral response to something. And then once you get these diagnoses, like, there's such a stigma,
They're yours too. They
right?
go with you. Yeah.
They go with you forever. And it's so hard to get that removed. And if you're given that diagnosis sort of erroneously without real, this is the other thing. I'm going to toss this in really quick. Back in the day when I first started looking at diagnoses and stuff, I got the little mini, you can get a little mini companion book that talks
Mhm.
about, like, how do I diagnose? And one of the statements that was stated in there is, you should be able to make a diagnosis, a full diagnosis in 15 minutes. I was shocked. I was like, you have got to be kidding me right now. Like 15 minutes,
Do you get to talk to your client for longer than
right?
15 minutes?
I'm
Or
like, that is insane. Like the fact that many of us have to make diagnoses in 90 minutes is too
Right,
fast. Like
right.
people aren't even opening up to you yet. So you can get these erroneous diagnoses based on behavior, based on things that have been reported to you, and not even know the full story from a client, because who is able to, even in 90 minutes, really get the full story of what is going on for someone?
Yeah. And then I would like to add, because you asked Peter about
Hmm.
decolonizing, I
Yep.
think that then even taking everything that Lisa said and looking at it collectively for groups of people who systemically are oppressed,
Mhm.
then so now we're not just talking about an individual who's had some things happen to them, but when we get large groups of people, particular, folks from particular racial and ethnic groups, folks, that have specific common experiences in the United States that are extremely oppressive and prejudiced and racialized, right? Then and then so we have these huge societal issues, and then we use the DSM to give people individual labels that are heavily stigmatized because of society's problems.
Mhm. Mhm.
So, like, these are society's problems, and then
Hmm.
we are individually pathologizing people
Mhm.
for
Hmm.
society's problems.
100.
Yeah, gee, I can't imagine why people who aren't white are reluctant to seek mental health services or arrive at the door with general distrust. I have no idea how that happens. It's very,
Right.
very
It's
confusing. While the two of you were talking, I was kind of, just going through my memory banks about things that I just haven't questioned, like the 50-minute therapeutic hour, for example, or the fact that we value insight and cognitive processing of ideas to solve problems. I had the good fortune of spending some time in Hawaii and living in a Hawaiian neighborhood with native where I was the minority, the haole without soul. And their approach to therapy was fascinating. It was storytelling.
mm.
It was
Mhm.
experiential. It was a troubled family member going to live with another, not even a family member, but a neighborhood trusted group.
Mhm.
And I just thought, talk therapy is not the only place where it's at, but that's really what we have come to accept without questioning,
Mhm,
Mhm.
um, which
mhm,
I think fits all of the points you were making just
mhm.
really perfectly. All right, so
Well,
we've done, well, you've done a very um, good job at doing the critical thinking about the status quo. And now always comes kind of like the hard part, right? So what do we do about it? So you've laid out some of the limitations. Um, do you have some ideas about what the alternatives are?
yes, we do.
All right, we'll get the magic wand. It's laying around here somewhere. Okay.
Right. I mean, I
Yeah.
think one of the models that we talk a lot, or frameworks that we talk a lot about in our courses, is the power threat meaning framework. And that is a framework that focuses in on what has happened to a person, and how power has impacted them in their lives. And
Mm.
so there are 6 pieces to it, and Sharon, help me out because I probably won't get them all. So it's power, threat, meaning, response,
Hmm.
Skills
skills, thank you, and story.
and story.
Yep.
Story.
Hmm.
Interesting. Yeah.
And so there's sort of a way of talking about each of those with the person. So it's sort of like, how has power impacted you in your life? And then the threat is, what did you do about it? I should have my slides up to remember, like, I get them mixed
How
up.
did it affect you?
How did it affect you?
The threat is, yeah, how did it affect you?
And then the meaning is, what did you make of that? Like, what meaning did you subscribe to that? And then the response is like, how did you get through? Like, what
Right.
did you do to survive? And then the skills are what are your strengths? And then the story is, what is the story that you want to tell about this? And so it's a way of opening up and deepening the conversation. And we teach this to all of our students, and it was so great. In our clinical methods class, one of the students that I had in that class said to me, I tried the power threat meaning with a client, and she said, I could not believe how much it opened up the conversation and where we were able to get versus this sort of prescribed assessment, biopsychosocial assessment of like, where did you grow up? How was your birth? All of those things, like actually allowing the person to tell their story, right? Storytelling is so important, and so key to most of us. Like, I think that it's effective with many, many groups of people. But for communities where storytelling is key to their health and their tradition, it's even more important that we're able to open this up in a way that is not medical model, not this sort of very clinical way of looking at it.
Yeah. Sharon, would you
Yeah.
like to add anything to that?
Yeah. So the way that we use this, again, this power threat meaning framework, they're doing some great things. It's from the British Psychological Society.
Okay.
And all of their stuff is free, right? Like you can just see the difference in the model of a for-profit system like we have in the United States, where we have to pay a lot of money to have this book that we're supposed to use, and that people have to pay a lot of money to get the diagnosis and then for the treatment, right? Whereas you've got different perspectives that are much more about community level healing in their values, and they develop a framework and then they just give it away and say, please use this.
Yes.
So just even that foundation and those values is very different. So
Yeah.
any of you can go look this up and get the resources and use it. So what we really are trying to do, like with our students in our class, but also we've done some workshops with social workers in the community as well. What we're really trying to have folks do is like really decenter the DSM in terms of its importance. You might have to use it. Like you might have to use it if you're billing insurance. They might require it. But
Yeah, I'm sorry for interrupting, but
yeah,
that was the one thing that I think we left out of the critical thinking, or at least I did, is how much that thing drives insurance reimbursement.
right.
And I think that's the point you're making, but I wanted to
Yeah,
make it
yeah.
explicit. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, yeah, no, that's absolutely it. So we might have to use it, but let's demystify it by one, recognizing it for what it is. It is a very imperfect book, right? And what it is it's a tool, or it's a process that we have to use because the insurance company requires it for billing. So let's set it to the side, and um, instead we're going to focus our assessment using this model that Lisa so wonderfully described, of really focusing on someone's lived experience and their very understandable reactions and responses to things that happen to them, and helping them really craft their story. That's where we center things. Then maybe as professionals, after the fact, we can look at that book. We can look at the DSM and
Have you
say,
noticed we're not naming it anymore? It's like
right,
Voldemort.
right,
Yeah.
the book.
The
Yeah.
book.
The book that shall not be named. Should we say
Yeah.
that? So, so maybe if we just see it as a billing tool, then that's part of it. I mean, I think that relates to another one of the critiques that we maybe indirectly talked about but didn't specifically name yet, but is important to name, is like if one of the purposes of the DSM is to give us clinical guidance, right? So like I know the person I'm working with is sort of in this depressive category. Okay, then that's supposed to help give me some clinical guidance for like what we might do. Um, there's been no, like there isn't really research evidence that backs that like whether a person got a diagnosis of major depressive disorder moderate or major depressive disorder severe, that you would necessarily do anything differently, or if they had PTSD with depressive symptoms, right? Because what we're treating is the symptoms. When we're working with folks, we're treating their symptoms, not their diagnosis. So the fact that the DSM has all of these clinical cutoffs that are the clinical cutoffs are another really big critique and problem. Because if you got, let's say you got 4 of these symptoms instead of 5, and you needed 5 to get the diagnosis, does this mean that the person couldn't benefit from the help? Right?
Mhm.
And so, in that sense, whether we get exact diagnosis in terms of what we do for our work with people, it doesn't really matter. It matters for billing. And because if you have an adjustment disorder diagnosis, you can only bill for these certain number of sessions. But if you have major depressive disorder, you can have more. Like
There's the
those are
recipe
really,
again. Right.
yeah, those are really the
Mhm.
only reasons why it matters which diagnosis you give, is so that you can get people the services that they need. In
Which
terms
is
of
like,
how we respond to people, it's based on their symptoms.
yeah,
And what they
yeah,
want to focus on also. I mean,
Well,
somebody who comes in with complex trauma is not necessarily ready to like work specifically on their trauma yet. Like there may be other things, or because we don't have a complex trauma diagnosis, we may have to diagnose with whatever symptoms are most prevalent, right? And so, but we may not work on that. So maybe like anxiety is the way that it's showing up, but so that's the diagnosis that we have to go with because there's not a complex trauma. But we know there's a trauma history. So then maybe we are focusing on the trauma because that will alleviate the anxiety, right? So
yeah,
it isn't necessarily telling us what to focus on. It is just saying, like, here, I need to get, like, I need sessions because this person
yeah.
is dealing with some stuff, right? So it is really, well, I just want to toss in one thing about like how do like the process of diagnosing and like how we can like because we still have to do this, right? We still have to use this DSM. One thing that I do with clients is that I talk them through. I've done it on both sides. Like one side they come to me and they're like, I have these diagnoses, but I don't know what they mean. Okay, well, let's talk about them. Let's see if they're even relevant for you. And
Mhm.
on the other side, okay, so I'm upfront in the beginning. Like we will have to we have to have a diagnosis at some point. We have this much time until we can, and then I have to have a diagnosis because that's the system that we're working under. So we talk through it. It's like, here's kind of where I'm heading. I want to talk with you about like how does that feel to you? What do you think about that? Like here are the reasons why I think that we can head in that direction. But I want to be transparent with the person as much as I can be, right? There are times when maybe you know, you feel that out as a clinician, right? But and in all cases where I am able, like I want to be able to be really transparent about that process and what it looks like and what that means. And, and how it's used beyond just this billing practice.
Mhm. Yeah, and that's really a decolonizing approach, right? We involve the person where we kind of arrive at a diagnosis in partnership, and we discuss the implications, right, of certain diagnoses and like
Yes.
what could be some of the downsides to having this label.
Mhm.
And we can that's one way to work within a system that is problematic, but
Mhm.
implement some decolonizing strategies, right? Like, to just be more
Yeah.
collaborative in the diagnostic process and informing people of things, right? And here's the thing, like we're kind of like laughing and making faces here on this Zoom call about this.
Yeah,
Like,
I wish
yeah,
people could see this. Yeah.
no, I know, right? Like we're social workers. Of course we should be collaborative, right? Like, and of course we should be informing people about the consequences of certain things. But historically, if you're super entrenched in a medical model system, that's not happening.
Mm.
I'm sure there's some clinicians out there that are doing it and are doing a great job.
Hmm.
But just in terms of like collectively, this isn't how we're taught to practice.
Right. Yes. It's not, we're not rewarded for that, right? We're not, that isn't something we're encouraged to do. I think people are doing it and I love that people are doing it. And I think that we're not always encouraged to do that. Yeah.
Yeah, this is what I especially, we're all educators, so I think this is one of the things that I think students need to hear is that here's the reality of the playing field.
Hmm.
Now, you are a social worker. We have a unique value system. We have a way of looking at the world that is uniquely ours. How are we going to navigate that if we want to be clinical social workers, which so many, at least of our students, want to be? And helping them navigate that slippery slope, I think is super wise for sure. To go back to your Lisa, I think it was your comments about how you your explanation of how assessment and diagnosis was done sounded very convoluted. And it sounded like you were almost, it was ripe for not doing the right thing, but doing what works to meet the right thing in terms of like not giving somebody the most accurate quote diagnosis, but when the diagnosis is linked to length of treatment, it's almost invites you to play around with the so-called classification system. It just seems backwards to me.
I
Um,
agree. It is, I think it is backwards. And it is, it's not like you're sort of fishing for a diagnosis, like, okay, what can we make up? Like they need to meet it, right? I mean,
mhm.
that's what we're looking at. And I mean, I think I have students sometimes who will say, well, I'm just going to give everybody adjustment disorder. I'm like, well, you're going to do
Oh,
them
you
a
beat me to it.
disservice,
Yep.
right? You're going to do them a disservice because you get 6 sessions for that. And if
Hmm.
you have somebody who's really dealing with some serious trauma and it's showing up as, maybe it's showing up mostly as depression, right? Like that's kind of where, because again, complex trauma, if they don't meet PTSD, yes, we can do, not otherwise specified, blah, 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 all those things. But like we want to get at what is actually the most troublesome piece of this, and what criteria does that meet related to the DSM. But yeah, we're not yeah, I don't want to give everybody adjustment disorder because it's doing them a disservice. Like service wise, it's doing them a disservice.
Years ago in my practitioner days, I was a clinical supervisor at an outpatient clinic, and I had social workers. We had social workers on the staff who I think were proud to be social workers and wanted to be as true to those values as humanly possible, despite the fact that we were hospital based, so you can imagine the medical model was worshipped. And as their supervisor, I had to review the treatment plans. It was an avalanche of adjustment disorder. It was like they got together and decided this is the least damaging
Yeah.
diagnosis, but
Mm-hmm.
they did not understand the piece that you talked about,
Yeah.
that it's also the least amount of coverage that
Mm-hmm.
you're going to get. So it was like you couldn't win. Um,
Yeah.
um, we've been focusing a lot about like on clinical work and preparing social workers um, in terms of their own kind of individual assessments and maybe intervention plans. But because we're social workers, we kind of dig the macro piece as well. I'm just wondering, do you two have thoughts about what kind of systemic and political activities that social workers who care about what we're talking about right now um, could advocate for or get involved with? Because these things go on levels that just filter down to individual social workers and practitioners. Do you have any thoughts about political or systemic changes that we might get involved with?
We need more social workers on the APA. The people who are working on the DSM. And we do have opportunities to comment,
Mhm.
air quotes,
Well, and that's a great idea, though. I
right?
mean, if you think about it, how many of us do?
Right.
Maybe
No.
academics do, but I don't know if a whole ton of practitioners do that, and they're the people doing the work.
Yeah. And I really believe like social workers make up, like we do the most diagnosing. And so really we have collectively, and this is, I think, the issue is that we get, and I talk about this in class, I'm sure Sharon does too, like it's really easy when you get into your professional work to get so micro focused that
Hmm.
you forget about that bigger picture and you forget to stand up and look around every once in a while and go, wait a minute, like I'm seeing things here that on a larger level really need intervention. And so that being collective, because right, as one person, it feels daunting. It's like, I don't know what I can do as one person here in
Hmm.
this. But as a collective of people, so getting, joining groups that are trying to affect change, like they're out there. There's all kinds of groups out there that are working on different aspects of social work and trying to make changes to our profession, but also to the places where we intersect, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
And so getting involved in those can give you a sense of, oh, we're all in this together. Like we do all want this change to happen.
Yeah. Thanks. Do you want to chime in on this at all, Sharon?
Yeah, I mean, and I think, some of the good places for that work, right, could be like, getting involved in your local chapter of NASW or
Hmm.
maybe, or, um, like in Minnesota, we have like a clinical mental health, clinical social work society, right? And so like being involved with those groups and encouraging those groups to be taking a stand, um, you know, um, push back for, in the I'm thinking of like at the legislature, like right, like with insurance companies. Let's try to argue for more than 6 sessions for adjustment disorder, right? I
Yeah.
mean, there's lots of places where we can and should be getting involved. And again, sometimes that does feel overwhelming when we're out there doing the work. And so
Yeah.
that's why I think joining in on some of those other professional organizations makes it easier to be a part of some collective work because
Mhm.
you got your numbers behind you there.
Yeah, while the two of you were talking, what drove my question that I just posed to the two of you was this thought of wouldn't it be a great start, one of many interventions, if we could decouple reimbursement from diagnostic labeling, and that reimbursement would be um, coupled more directly with the story, for example, that you were, there's going to be all sorts of pushback on that. But it's not like what we have in place right now is the greatest thing since ice cream, right? It's
Right.
like, let's give something different a try. And it might
Right.
even be more accountable. Um,
Hmm. And
Yeah. Yeah.
there
Go ahead.
are examples of that happening out in the community too, right? Like, I mean, in our community, we're in the Twin Cities area in Minnesota. Post the murder of George Floyd, there were um, there were some collective efforts to respond to community mental health, right? Like right in our backyard of where this tragedy occurred, and there was
Mm.
um, a lot of unrest and just real hurt and community level trauma. And there were groups of people that came together to look at, hey, how do we support the community's mental health as a community, right? And there are some really cool like grassroots based um mental health providers that are still in operation that kind of developed post the murder of George Floyd in the Twin Cities that don't use insurance.
Mhm.
And
Ah,
so they've kind of collectively come together to find alternative funding streams to support the mental health work. And so therefore they do not bill insurance. They do provide services to community members on, sliding fee basis, and then they have some alternative funding streams. And because of that, they're not bound to those, we must come up with a DSM diagnosis after the first session. And they don't do
Mhm.
it. And they assess, they absolutely still assess, right?
Right.
Because that's good practice.
Mhm.
But their assessment isn't based on the DSM, and they
Mhm.
don't even use it.
Yep.
interesting.
Yeah, and the
So
assessment
it
Well,
can take
exists.
longer.
It exists.
Mhm.
what's that, Lisa?
I can just say the assessment can take longer. Like the person gets time to actually open up and develop trust with the clinician before having to, show their whole hand. Like it just doesn't even make sense to me. Like it's so I used to do work with a drop-in center for young people who were houseless, and we talked about that all the time. Like we had this assessment that we wanted to go through, but we always said like you will learn all that you need to know over time as the person is ready to open up to you. And that is how it should be. Allowing the person time to build trust and recognize like, oh, you are a person who I can reveal things to and be honest with. And then we can figure out where, like that's how we figure out how to move together. And but you can't do that in 90 minutes. Like it's such a false narrative, like it's such a false way of thinking about the work. It just makes me crazy.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it actually takes me back to when you were talking about the power threat meaning approach. A lot of what I wasn't familiar with that. And when you were talking about it, it reminded me a lot of narrative therapy. Um,
Hmm.
and
Yes.
you
Yes.
identify the limited story, you help a client expand the story, and then reauthor it.
Mhm.
And that takes a little bit, right? And actually, the evidence around narrative therapy is pretty good. It's
Okay, I have to just tell you something really quick because it made me laugh so much. So I started with a new company doing I do private practice on the side.
uh-huh.
And when I'm not teaching, and the person I was interviewed to become part of this sort of larger group. And the person said, "Well, what evidence-based practices do you use?" And I said, and all like, first off, I'm like, oop, hackles up, hate that word so much. And I said, well, I'm, overarching, I'm a narrative. I use narrative. And she's like, well, we need like really evidence-based. I'm like, lady, there's a journal on narrative therapy.
Yeah.
Like, you guys are lost. Like that is
Uh-huh.
evidence-based practice. I was just floored that it's like,
They
I'm
weren't
like,
into the postmodern movement that is driving
right. I said, well,
psychotherapy
what do you
nowadays,
mean
but
by evidence-based? She goes, well, CBT. And I'm like, okay, those are not the only things. And I will tell you, those don't work with everybody. Not universal, not universal. So, then it's like, okay, so now I'm working with someone. I have to like, do I use some, elements of CBT? Of course I do. because, it's about thinking and like how our thoughts and our, intervent, whatever, blah, blah, blah. But it's just so ridiculous to me that it's like, oh, narrative's not, what? Narrative's not. So,
Mm-hmm.
so yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, narrative, which has been around forever,
Mm-hmm.
is not, it's not considered evidence-based everywhere. And yet it is.
Yeah.
If you want, well, evidence-based, well,
Mm-hmm. Sharon looks like she's dying to say something.
No, it's
So,
okay. No, it's okay.
all
I'm
right.
good.
So, all right, we're starting to get in the neighborhood of our time limit here,
Yeah.
and I was actually thinking, you folks are from Minneapolis, and I was thinking about George Floyd and that period afterwards where we kind of there was that moment where like understanding and actually contextualizing, at least in the national discussion, seemed to and Black Lives Matter movements and all that, and and then it kind of went away, I think. And here in Buffalo, um, a young man drove from the middle, and this is a large state to drive across, drove like 3 hours from the middle of the state to Western New York, specifically to shoot black people in one of our supermarkets, and ended up killing 10 people. And it was pretty much the same. Everybody came together. There was this brief interlude of understanding, and then we kind of went back to being who we are, a
mhm,
very segregated city in many ways. So I think what I see currently are even many social workers and people who are like-minded, they seem almost immobilized and kind of almost resigned to the fact that cynical, much less, transformative change related, for example, to decolonizing frameworks isn't even possible. It's forget it. We don't live in that climate. You've said a lot today, but do you have any kind of encouraging words to keep people moving forward beyond all the things you've said so far? Or how you do it, quite frankly?
Um, I think one thing is that we need to be talking about it, like with each other. We need to give our students space to talk about it. Um, but that demoralized feeling, right? We see that a lot. We're seeing that a lot. I'm seeing that a lot more lately, especially given that we're in the middle of a shutdown and nobody knows what's going to happen food with food support and all sorts of things. And so we have lots of students that of course are coming to school and they've just left their practicum placement and they're demoralized and um they say, why do this work? Or like, I'm not going to be able to practice in the way that I want to practice. Why are
Mhm.
we even reading this book? So we all of our students read Decolonizing Therapy by Jennifer Mulan.
Mhm.
And they read it and then they discuss it in like a book club format.
Mhm.
And so we make space for them to talk about it and really having those conversations, I think, during these tight times, or the tight isn't the right word, but our current times of opposition to progress, right? To making any real major systemic change for the good. Um, like that's why we need to be on the inside of those systems more than
Mhm.
ever. Doing like being that safe voice within the problematic system and that safe space. Um, there's lots of little micro level things that we can do during these times, right? Like how we do our assessments, how we engage how we practice as a team. We actually have a lot of control over that. And so
Mhm.
we can continue to really try to practice in these values, and we need to talk to each other and give space for people to talk to each other. and form community.
Mm-hmm.
And so that we can, like, community can take care of each other.
Mm-hmm.
That's how we're going to get through.
Yeah, I think we're at the point where it seems like the political systems are not going to do that, so we're going to have to do it.
That's right.
Yeah, here at at our school in Buffalo, we're really struggling with we feel that we are not as engaged with the community as we could be. We're like this campus stuff. So, but to your point, bringing together students, faculty, practitioners, and community leaders, that's the way to do it. And we should be good at that. That's like our mojo. So yeah, thank you. So we are now up against our barrier, our self-imposed barrier for time. But I want to leave you with, parting thoughts. If there's anything that we didn't get to that you really want to lay out, or if there's a summary statement that you would like to make, here's your chance.
I think just the only thing I really wanted to say is just try something. Like one thing. It doesn't have to be huge. How you set up your office to make it inviting to multiple people. Like anything. Just try something. And as Sharon said, get involved. Be with other people. And we affect change by working together and being collective.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, if I could, I'm sorry, Sharon, if we don't have to reinvent the wheel. I mean, I think I don't know if we need to remind people that there's a big difference between treating complex trauma and trauma-informed service delivery. And a trauma-informed service delivery system would be ideal to promote the ideas that the two of you have been talking about. So we don't have to invent it. In many ways, it's right there for the taking. Sorry, Sharon. Thank you for being patient.
No, that's okay. The only thing that I wanted to add was that, and this is just adding to the other piece that we've been talking about, is really to lean into our professional identity as social workers. Like, we are about systemic change. We are about social justice. And so that's why being together, right? Like having some peer consultation groups, talking about how we're doing this practice in these times, right? Like that's how, that's what's going to hold us accountable to our professional values and our practice standards, right? If we, we can hold each other accountable. And as Lisa said, it can be something really small that you do. You can do small things to make a big difference so that someone feels safe and heard.
Yeah. And a lot of us, including me, we have to reconcile that often the pace of change is glacial. And we have to be in it for the long haul. It's not just going to a march and then saying, whoa, that was fun. I'm jazzed by that. But okay, what do you do after the march? And,
right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, you know what? Thanks to both of you. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for spending the time. It was an absolute pleasure.
Thank you, Peter. It was really fun.
Yes, thank you.
The In Social Work podcast team is Steve Sturman, our tech guru and web and media director. Ryan Trope is our graduate production assistant, recording editor, and content contributor. Say hi, Ryan.
Hello.
And I'm Peter Sabota. We'll see you next month, everybody.